Boker Tov. Wow, this is a slow crowd, or maybe foreign crowd. So good morning, Boker Tov. Thank you many for a very energetic opening. It's really wonderful to open the first ever FinTech conference as part of the CYBERWEEK of Israel. Every year, like the stock market, every year we have another side event, another conference, and we're very proud of it. Let me start by saying a couple of good words. The place where I come from, it all starts with gratitude. So first of all, I want to thank the people who actually worked so hard to put the CYBERWEEK here together. I would start with Gili and her wonderful team, Daria, and many, many others who worked so hard to make it happen. You cannot even imagine how many hours you have to invest in order to bring so many ideas and good talent to one place. Secondly, I want to thank my colleagues from Duff and Phelps and Page Mill Partners who came from all over the world to be here with us. My colleague here, Rory O'Sullivan, thank you very much for coming from London. Nick from Paris, and we have some others from other parts of the world. My name is Efraim Chalamish, as many kindly introduced me. I'm based in New York. I'm a professor at NYU, and I'm a senior advisor with Duff and Phelps. And Duff and Phelps is a leading company in the valuation and risk management space, and Rory will speak more about our work on the technology side and advisory. The topic for this morning is cyber and fintech, and I think many of you put together such a great context because at the end of the day, it's all about the tension between innovation and trust, innovation, and security threats. We have a wonderful, wonderful panel. Let me introduce them very, very briefly. You have their impressive bios with you guys, so you're here to learn and listen. So please, let's start. Ladies first, Keren Elazari. Keren is a well-known figure in this cyberspace. She's a thought leader, she's an analyst, she's been advising many, many companies around the world, including financial institutions, and we're very blessed to have you here with us. Thank you very much. And she's a troublemaker in a good way, so hopefully she will...
I'm a friendly hacker.
Friendly hacker, so hopefully she will give us some interesting headlines. Second in command, we have Yoav Tzruya. Please join us. Yoav is a senior partner with JVP, one of Israel's leading venture capital firms. He's the head of CyberLabs, which is an exciting, especially for our foreign audience here, very exciting project in the South, focusing on cybersecurity, innovation, companies, and tech. Thank you very much, Yoav, for being with us this morning. We are looking forward to listening to your wonderful comments, and we won't reveal any birthday birthday occasions here. And then third, please join us, Kobi Samboursky. I just learned, because Samboursky is such an exotic name, that it comes from a very special region from Eastern Europe. So if we have any Eastern Europeans here in the audience, especially in the cyberspace, maybe you want to connect with Kobi after the event. Kobi is one of the founders of Glilot Capital, a very prominent investment firm here in Israel. Like you have, a very, very deep experience in the venture capital space, including, of course, cyber and cybersecurity. Great entrepreneur. We're lucky to have you here with us, and we're looking forward to learning from you, thinking with you. Please challenge us and challenge yourself. I think your time is as valuable as mine, so hopefully you will leave the room with some interesting new insights that will help you to invest better and make some new friends along the way. We have about 20 minutes. It's not much, so we should start very quickly. Let's start with you, Yoav, if you don't mind. So we had a big financial crisis about 10 years ago, and when people did a lot of research why Canada and Israel, for example, kind of succeeded and survived the financial crisis well, unlike the rest of the world, the conclusion was that it was very insular. In other words, they managed to build systems in Canada, in Israel, in banking, which helped them to be a little bit more secured. Do you think that's what we should do in the context of cybersecurity 10 years later in order to prevent the next tsunami and wave that many talked about?
So I think that, first of all, insulation is always a good solution for cybersecurity issues. I had a chat, and that a funny story, I had a chat with one of the Israeli bank CISOs a few years ago, and he told me that his best defense cybersecurity-wise, his best solution was using Hebrew as a user interface language rather than, a few years ago it was rather hard on the hackers to cope with that, I guess. Not anymore, by the way. But I think that insulating or air gapping in the technical manner of the word or anything equivalent conceptually is not going to be sustainable, right? A typical example would be obviously upcoming regulations such as PSD2 and such, forcing financial institutions to open up. And if we just recall a few weeks ago or a couple months ago, the Cambridge Analytica kind of fiasco with Facebook and such. So PSD2 is Cambridge Analytica waiting to happen again and again for financial institutions in a much larger and more significant way. So the question, I think that what worked before, and you touched on one aspect of what worked a few years ago, what worked before will certainly not work in the future. We need to rethink how we come up with financial or FinTech solutions, how banks implement technology, tech for fin kind of a solution, and how they view the role in cybersecurity and all of that. And I think that there are many new trends, ranging from implementing private blockchain to PSD2 to third parties applications in financial services and a variety of other the catering for the millennials, which is requiring a different kind of set of solutions, and each one of them will require a different security paradigm, and that's what we're focusing on.
So my biggest takeaway point so far from you, you're talking about customized, fragmented security solutions based on the target market. What do you think, Kobi? How close we are to the Cambridge Analytica moment in the financial industry? I think many of our guests here from abroad would love to hear your view on that.
So, it's hard to say, and I think, even that we are investors, it's not necessarily, we have, the crystal ball and everything, and anything, but I think it's obvious, and I definitely agree with you, Yoav. I think it's not about isolation. It's about, if we think about this new era, it's all about joining forces. It's all about being open. It's all about, collaborating on whatever. And I think this is the challenge for us or for the cyber industry is to come up with solutions that are going to, protect as much as possible while still being, living in an open, type of architecture. And that's maybe the biggest thing that we will have to do. There will be Cambridge Analytica scenarios. There will be some, catastrophic scenarios. But I think, again, for us, it's actually a great opportunity because at the end of the day, those new organizations that will learn how to leverage, cyber in a good way and build themselves, more secure bottom up will become triumph at the end of the day. So to me, it's actually a great opportunity, more than anything else.
I want to jump in there. May I?
Of course. I'll just ask you, Keren, something even more specific, kind of as a follow-up on Kobi's point. So he's actually talking about the tension between innovation and risk as an opportunity, not as a threat. But you deal a lot with showing banks, financial institutions, other institutions the threats. From my experience working with financial institutions for many years, it's been considered more conservative industry, more conservative people. How you deal with the cultural aspect once you introduce your hacking strategies as a way to show the threats?
Certainly. So I would just like to note that this is actually changing. Yes, the financial industry has been very conservative for many years, but from my personal experience in the past 5 years, I've spoken at and with organizations that are probably the most conservatives that you can imagine, European banks, Swiss banks, big financial institutions based in the UK and in Europe, and they have all learned in different ways and in a gradual process to harness and embrace the outsider's perspective. So that's the outsider's perspective that the friendly hackers, security testers, red team testing, penetration testing, that's the outsider's perspective about security that myself, or rather the people that I work with, the people I represent, those friendly hackers can provide that outsider's point of view. In fact, right now around the world, I'm seeing banks and financial institutions not just investing in that sort of mindset, but even collaborating with and sponsoring friendly hacker events and security conferences so that they can hire their next generation IT talent and IT security talent from that talent pool. So they don't necessarily look for that same traditional background when they're hiring people into the organization. But I wanted to say something about the previous issue about talking, will banks get hacked? Will we see another massive data breach? Will we see the Cambridge Analytica scandal of the future? Certainly we will. However, what I'd like to do is take this opportunity to encourage the audience, the people in financial institutions and the people that are developing technology for financial institutions. I think it's time to just completely rethink the way we look at data, at user data, at customer data. If software is eating the world and if big data is the fuel for innovation, that means that if you have a massive data breach, it's almost like a toxic spill or like a fuel, like an oil spill. And that means that organizations, companies are going to have to deal with data breaches as if they're dealing with something toxic that's happening and that they have to take responsibility for.
Thank you very much. Yoav, Keren touched a couple of very important points here. She talked about talent management. She talks about the need for banks and financial institutions to sometimes change, and it sounds like it's changing the culture a little bit. You meet many entrepreneurs almost on a daily basis. They invent the next big thing. They went to the right military units, and they understand how financial institutions work. We know that too often it's not the case. And banking is changing. For example, asset management is on the rise while some parts of banking are declining. How do you explain these entrepreneurs the changes in the financial industry in order for them to adopt or come up with better solutions on the security side?
Yeah, I think that there is no lack of good technology ideas in the cybersecurity domain. We see many companies that are addressing a specific attack vector, a specific cybersecurity risk, and that's all great. You can build a nice little company doing that. But I think that what we at least are looking for is to see the next billion-dollar company. We at JVP, we've been around for 25 years now. We've had exits in value, combined value of about $22 billion. Okay, so we're not looking for the next $50 million kind of exit, but rather at least the potential to reach, at least at the time of the investment, we want to believe that we can reach the next billion-dollar company. And for that, coming up with a technology solution is not enough, right? And this is a mindset that we need as an industry, on the supply side, right? On the solution side in cybersecurity domain, we need to change our mindset. It's not enough to come up with yet another solution. We need to thoroughly and deeply understand the business case that we're solving. Any specific attack vector that is being addressed today, it doesn't matter which one and in which industry, it's just not enough to build a large enough company.
So what is the next big important innovation, not on the cyber side, on the financial, institution side that you're looking at? Give us some interesting headlines.
I'll give you two examples, okay? So a lot of the capital applied today in public equities obviously is driven off of, let's say, business risk analysis of the portfolios that you're investing in, equity investment, debt investing, and so forth. And this is all based on rating of those companies. The business risk, Moody's, S&P, the business risk of those companies. And yet, if you think about it, the World Economic Forum defines cybersecurity as risk number one, right? And none of those business ratings of equities and debt and so forth takes into account cyber risk, okay? So people are investing based on risk models that are completely detached and irrelevant to the actual risk those underlying assets suffer from. So that's a very interesting and a huge trillion-dollar problem to solve. And there are a couple of other such-like solutions that we're working on.
I love this story, especially because being in New York for so many years, I see how traditional and conservative the rating agencies, the risk management companies are, and there is always a need within these companies, and we try to do it too, to be a little bit more innovative in the whole rating and risk management. For example, we spoke yesterday about the whole unicorn universe and how many of these companies actually in reality are not, their value is not as we think because of many other risks like the one you just mentioned. Kobi, I would like to continue with you, if you don't mind, and actually kind of follow up on Yoav's point. Once you get into the valuation of innovation, when you try to bridge the gap, when you value a potential company as part of your portfolio, and you bridge the gap between these big problems that we're trying to solve and the technology, the cyber technology, where is your heart? How you bridge the two when you have to make a decision, which solution to solve, which technology to bet on?
All right, it's a good question. I think, we started Glilot like 7.5 years ago, and one of our core ideas was to be very focused as a fund. Most of what we do is cyber. And I think being focused allows you to really understand, the problem, understand the customers and so forth. So typically for us, when we look at a company to invest or, when we already are invested in a company and want to find ways to help it, they help the company. It's mostly based on our deep understanding of the market and customers and trying to reach out to the customers and try to figure out if this is exactly what they need, and if not, fix it. I think, so again, when we started 7.5 years ago, the market, there was not, too many cybersecurity companies around, so it was actually easier. Now, not just now, in the last 4 or 5 years, it became more difficult because there are, so many solutions out there. But to me, it just makes this process that we do even more important. So it's all about reaching out to the big customers, trying to really understand what they're missing, what are those components that they're missing, exactly how to build them in a way that optimizes the value of this specific company. Of course, there are, many examples, but I think the bottom line is you need to really be in real touch with customers on a daily basis to really figure out, what's the right way to.
Sounds like, before I'll get to you, Keren, sounds like you're more into collaboration with big financial institutions than the disruptive approach. Give me one, before we hear Keren, give me one little example how startups in cyber should collaborate with big financial institutions and not necessarily disrupt them, which is the kind of human nature in our industry.
No, so certainly I think, an exciting example from my side is a company called Insights. Young company, we did the seed round sometime like late 2015. They just recently completed the C round, selling, many $1 million a year. I don't want to say the specific number, working with many big institutions. So, just to give you an example what they do, and actually, maybe going back to some of the comments that said that were mentioned before, they can give you an assessment on the level of risk you have in your organization and also help you solve it in completely automatic manner without no installation on your network, just looking at the darknet and other places, which is perfect for most organizations because it's a very quick, high-value solution with almost zero effort on the side of the customer. And if you look at financial institutions and also other institutions today, they don't necessarily have enough cyber people to really, be able to, read a report and actually, send, 2-3 people to fix the problem. So if you can give them solutions that are very easy to digest, zero onboarding, high value with, low touch, that's I think a great example of things you should do today.
So let's take your point here, Keren, and talk about the simplicity of the solutions for the FinTech, for the financial industry. Because sometimes bank employees, asset managers, even people on stock exchanges, which is a big market right now, they feel like, as you just said, Kobi, the solutions are too complicated, not low touch. Keren, from what you see, the people you work with, what needs to be done in order to make the solutions a little bit simpler?
So that's a great point. I recently visited the Swiss Stock Exchange in Zurich, and they have a very interesting model. They're not just the Swiss Stock Exchange, they also offer IT and data processing services to many of the Swiss banks and financial institutions. And they recently set up a SOC, a Security Operations Center, and now the Swiss Stock Exchange can actually offer security services, kind of a model of a managed security service model, if you're familiar with that, but they can offer security services to their constituents, to the banks and financial institutions that rely on them for IT and data processing services. And that means that they can concentrate the talent, the friendly hackers, the researchers, the security intelligence. They brought in a very big, sophisticated system from IBM, utilizing Watson, so utilizing, you could kind of say AI even. And they can offer something which is very big, very complicated, very hard to understand. They can offer that as a service. And I believe that's quite an innovative model. And what I like about the Swiss model is that while the Swiss are very conservative, just like Israel, the size is small. So they don't have 500 banks or 5,000 financial institutions. Here in Israel, oh, by the way, I'm curious, how many people here in the room are from abroad, not from Israel, or from outside of the country? Almost half
That's
of you.
fantastic. That's
Almost,
even more than half.
yeah,
We're very lucky.
More than 50% of you. And there's a reason you decided to come to Tel Aviv to learn about cybersecurity. Well, we're a very small country. One of the reasons I believe we have a lot of innovation is actually our smallness. Specifically talking about banks. When I was starting in this industry, 15, 20 years ago, I would go into the IT center for one of the biggest the biggest Israeli banks, one of the biggest consumer-facing banks. And while it's one of the biggest ones, they still serve maybe 2 million customers in Israel. And in the parking lot, you could see cars with the logos for every cybersecurity company, every IT company, every innovative upstart. Because of the smallness of that bank and the agility and the flexibility of their IT team, they were able to be the testing grounds, the playing grounds for a lot of Israeli innovations very early on. So even if, for example, even if some of the entrepreneurs that the fellow VCs here, some of those entrepreneurs might need that chance to test their technology in the real world financial institutions. Before they can deploy it at Citibank or Bank of America, they can start with local Israeli bank and test it out on a much smaller but effective scale. And I think that's been the success story for a lot of Israeli companies starting out here.
Yoav wants to respond.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe you have a different experience.
I don't know what's Kobi's opinion of that, but we have a very, an Israeli bank's friend in the audience. Excuse me in advance for saying that, but look, it's an advantage and a disadvantage. Okay, I would say that working with Israeli banks is a humbling experience for an entrepreneur.
That's not always a bad thing for Israeli entrepreneurs to have.
Yes, it's not a bad thing necessarily, especially before we invest. We want valuation to go down, so it's good. But I don't think necessarily that the Israeli banks' needs are reflecting well, neither from a product perspective nor from a sales cycle perspective, the global markets. And financial institutions are definitely the #1 market for most cybersecurity companies. And we've been through that process many times where we have good initial success or actually failure in engaging with the Israeli banks. But when you go abroad, the picture changes completely. And I think that entrepreneurs need to be cognizant of allocating their resources in the proper manner between the two constituencies.
We're very close towards the end,
I have to steal the mic.
I see you want to respond.
Just for a second, because I 200% agree with you. Whoever knows us, it doesn't happen, much, so we need to,
Took us 20
grasp the
minutes to
moment.
get there.
No, seriously, I think this is like super important. I don't know, are there entrepreneurs in the crowd as well? Okay, so at least to me, one of the things that I keep saying to entrepreneurs in cyber, also in other areas, is go to the real market, go to the US, even if you don't have funding, you just, just buy a ticket for $1,000 and just go there and just go selling. There's such a huge difference between selling to a CISO, whatever, in California or New York than selling one here. And I know that we have great people from the Israeli, banking system, and we have great friends there. And I see many that has had a long career there looking at me. But no, seriously, specifically when the market is crowded like today, and specifically when sometimes it's all about those small UX details or small feature details. It's not, in most cases, it's not about the big underlying technology that you can say, okay, it doesn't matter if the screen is going to be this way or that way. Today, it's more about the details, and the entire idea about reaching customers in early days, it's not about generating a sale. You know, sometimes we see entrepreneurs come and say, yeah, but we've been able to sell into whatever, this one bank or another. It doesn't really matter. What matters is really understanding customers and building the product from the beginning to the right customers, or to customers that represent a big market, right? And this is what you have to do. So this is one thing I wanted to say, sorry. And then another thing, I think also important, the world is coming here, right? And I think the world is, we're talking about this industry as being very conservative. We have here in Israel now, Citi, we have Barclays, we have a few very big financial institutions, JP Morgan, coming here, investing a lot of money where their only purpose is getting closer to the Israeli startup ecosystem. And this is something huge that happened in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. It's not enough, and we need to, and we need to do better. And we are at Glilot investing huge efforts, pushing our entrepreneurs, again, to the US market. But it is changing. It's not as it was 10 years ago or 7 years ago.
So my takeaway, a couple of thoughts on what you just said, Kobi, and then I'll finish here before I get into a street fight with many. One is, we need to get closer to the big markets to understand the details. And one way to do it, get closer to the US, get closer to Europe, get closer to Asia. And one way to do it is exactly what we're doing here, because we have so many Europeans and American executives, security specialists, customers, bankers, and that's the way to do it, to do a dialogue. This is just the beginning. We're here to bring people together, to learn from the best, but at the same time to start the dialogue and to continue thinking how we actually can understand the details and apply them. Secondly, as you just said, bring America here, in the sense that bring the big financial institutions to look into the research and to develop great ideas here. And finally, understanding consumers is getting closer to the consumers, meaning that telling entrepreneurs to spend more time with the little guy or lady on the street and not necessarily with the big institutions that they have in mind. Thank you very much for doing it.